here. Am I audible? Hello?
Yes,
Yes, Mahavir, go ahead. Everything is perfect.
yeah.
Thank you. Okay, so I would start by thanking the organizer for giving me this opportunity to speak to all of you here today, and I especially feel humbled and honored to speak here because as we know, this webinar series is now conducted in the memory of our late colleague Professor Hanundatta Athreya. We have wonderful memories of him with us. I remember, his ever smiling face and his willingness to discuss science and especially NMR whenever I had a chance in the campus or in NMRS conferences or a few times actually we have met in transit, in flights and so on. So it's really wonderful, and I think this is a perfect tribute to Athreya. And today I will share some of my aspect of our lab work that we have been doing for past few years. All right, so I'll get going. So I thought, I would introduce myself, but I'm introduced for my background by Professor Surya Prakash. So in MBU, so our lab is at Molecular Biophysics Unit at Indian Institute of Science in Bangalore. We are interested in understanding protein nucleic acid interactions, and we are interested in some particular biological phenomena or the processes that we are trying to understand currently. One interest that is coming with me from my postdoctoral work is basically understanding the telomere, how telomere DNA is maintained, and in the cell that is maintained by an RNA protein complex called telomerase holoenzyme. And that was the topic of my my research back in USA when I was at UCLA. But here we shifted our focus, and we are trying to understand how telomere DNA is remodeled by many the remodeling factors or the proteins which are regular RNA binding or DNA or nucleic acid binding proteins, or also proteins which have enzymatic activities such as helicases and so on. Then that work led us to to investigate the role of RGG motif containing protein and their role in what is emerging now in sensing or binding or recognizing the ordered DNA and RNA structures. So that is what I will talk about today, an aspect of that. Our lab is also interested in understanding bacterial toxin antitoxin system. This is an interest that we picked up here after coming to IISc as part of a larger project that I had with several colleagues in the department or outside. So that is also we find it very interesting, and several people work on the instructional aspect of it. We are also interested in understanding that, but for example, we are trying to understand the structure, assembly, activation of these toxin antitoxin systems through all the biophysical methods, including X-ray crystallography, NMR, and other methods. There particularly, we are interested in type 3 TA system. The one I'm showing right now is just we published one paper on type 2 system called HIG-BA. But our focus from now on would be on type 3 TA system, which is a protein RNA complex, where the toxin is protein and the RNA is the antitoxin is an RNA molecule, which I find very fascinating and relatively less studied. So that will be our focus, and I hope that in coming future we will have an opportunity to share some of our exciting results there. But for today, I will talk about this RGG motif of one protein called HNRNP-A1, and I will give some background to that first. So as we know, the cell dedicates a large percentage of its proteome for binding or interacting with the nucleic acid, especially with the RNA. As much as 3 to 11% of all cells proteome in different organisms is dedicated to RNA binding. But and when we talk about protein structure and their role in binding to the nucleic acid, we generally attribute it to the classical RNA binding domains, which we probably know, many of us. They include folded domains such as RNA recognition motif domain, RBD, KH domain, zinc finger, dead box, helicase, etc. But what is emerging is that the intrinsically disordered region or the sequences or motif in RNA binding proteins seems to be equally important to modulate, either directly bind or recognize the RNA, or modulate the RNA binding functions of the neighboring RBDs. So, one such motif is RGG motif. Okay, this is a motif that is, as the name suggests, rich in arginine and glycine. We have either RG motif or RGG motif, and they come in different flavor, like di-RGG motif or tri-RGG motif. The RGG motif together are known as RGG box. So, for example, let me get the pointer. Okay, the RGG motif here, the 3 RGG motifs constitute a RGG box usually, right? So it can be 3 RGG motifs together. People call it RGG box. The RGG sequence here is separated by anywhere from 0 to 4 other amino acid. And what is also emerging is that usually a phenylalanine or tyrosine residue is found in that intervening peptide sequence. So the RGG motif is actually quite abundant in the proteome. It is in some papers I read that it is the second most abundant and common RNA binding motif in the proteome. It is usually found as multiple of, as I mentioned, multiple of RGG repeats. And the other hallmark is that it is usually found adjacent to other RNA binding domains like RRM or zinc finger or KH domain. And people who are following this area, it is also now coming up that RGG motif or repeat containing proteins are implicated in liquid-liquid phase separation in the cell, which is the phenomena behind formation of many these organelle-less granules or these organelles in the cells, such as P bodies and RNP granule, stress granules, etc. But parallelly, the other emerging trend is that the RGG motifs seems to be also sensor of higher order RNA and DNA structures, especially of the G quadruplex structures. It gets even more interesting because arginine in RGG motifs is often found to undergo reversible methylation. So, how cell uses that for the functions of this protein, such as binding to the quadruplexes or in LLPS, is also a current area of research in many groups across the world. So. Yeah, so the RGG motif, as I said, is also been reported in several proteins to bind to the quadruplexes. This is one, I would say, one of the main finding some now maybe a decade back, or some years back, not decade. The last one is 2015, where Dinshaw Patel's group they determined the structures of an RGG peptide from this protein FMRP bound to a quadruplex. And this quadruplex was found through the RNA selection methods, but nonetheless, they solved the structure and it showed how RGG motif can specifically bind to the quadruplex. But again, this was not a sort of natural quadruplex sequence, and as you can see in the structure, the peptides, the RGG peptides, was found to bind at the junction of the duplex and the quadruplex region. So. But since then, there are other reports. There are also systematic studies. For example, this one in JACS in 2018, where they explored and they identified they reported that RGG motifs indeed may be an G quadruplex binding motif in many proteins. And like that, there are several other studies. Okay, so there are also some beautiful papers coming and reviews written by Julie Foreman-Kay, like why arginine and glycine have selected advantage to interact with the RNA, and some of that is quite obvious, especially for arginine, that it can form the charge interaction with the RNA. It can form cation pi kind of interactions. It can interact, arginine side chain can interact with the sugar. It can form, of course, hydrogen bond with the base and so on. So with that background, I'll come to the protein that we are interested in. It's a protein called the HNRNP-A1. This is a protein that is that has many roles in the cell. It is involved in different aspects of RNA metabolism, but it has specific role at the telomere ends. It is known to help in telomere maintenance, DNA maintenance. And at the telomere, I would again briefly tell you guys that the extreme end of telomere DNA remains single-stranded, which can adopt, because of the nature of the sequence, TTA, GGG in case of vertebrate, it can adopt quadruplexes. And this is a very well-studied area. Telomere DNA can also be transcribed into an RNA called telomere repeat containing RNA tera, which has been shown to have a role in telomere DNA maintenance as well. And again, because of the same sequence now in RNA, in case of tera RNA, it has also been shown to adopt G quadruplex structures. Now, again, I will not go in detail in this slide, but essentially the interplay of HNRNP-A1 interactions with the telomere DNA and tera RNA repeat has been shown to orchestrate the telomere maintenance by the telomerase enzyme. Okay, so in nutshell, for the purpose of this talk, HNRNP-A1 has been shown to interact both with telomere DNA as well as tera RNA. So for this part of our research, we thought we'll simply ask the question, the telomere DNA can exist in the single-stranded form as well as in the quadruplex form, and same is true for the RNA. So we just wanted to study the contribution of different part of the HNRNP-A1 for towards binding of the telomere DNA as well as tera RNA. For that, I'll introduce this protein a little bit further. So it's a well-studied protein, as I mentioned. It has a folded domain, folded half of the protein, which is called UP1 domain, which actually consists of two RRM domains, RRM1 and RRM2, followed by an intrinsically disordered domain. And that domain contains an RGG box and also, the prion-like sequences, which people are finding, along with, the whole LCD domain of this has been implicated in liquid-liquid phase separation. So for this part, when we started, we just actually thought to just probe the role of RGG motif, and I'll show why we got interested in that. So for the practical purposes, we basically either worked on the full-length HNRNP-A1 or the UP1 plus RGG domain of HNRNP-A1, the UP1 domain and the RGG box alone. And for making the DNA and RNA quadruplexes, we use the standard sequences, which are very well thoroughly characterized by many people around the world for many long time. So we didn't have much trouble there. We just used the well-established sequences from both DNA as well as RNA to form the quadruplexes. And so I'm just showing their characterization. Basically, this is just a repeat of what other people had done. The other thing is that, we know that you can form quadruplexes of different topologies and structure, for DNA as well as for the RNA. And so we also use that to get some key insight in our work. But this is all well established. So in the beginning, where we studied the interaction of UP1 domain or UP1 plus RGG with ITC with the single stranded DNA and RNA. What we saw or noticed is that having RGG motif, having RGG motif along with UP1 domain had very marginal or negligible effect on the binding affinity. Okay, so the binding of RGG, the binding of UP1 domain, whether it is without RGG motif or with RGG motif, the KD, the dissociation constant for single-stranded DNA as well as RNA remain approximately same, which through that, what we concluded is that RGG motif is not having influence on binding to the single-stranded form of DNA and RNA. So this was the time when we were just exploring this. We had no idea whether this is has meaning or not. But so we were also then studying interaction of UP1 and UP1 plus RGG domain with the quadruplexes, both from DNA and RNA. I'm just, for the representative sake, I'm showing quadruplex structures here. For this, what we notice is that having RGG motif along with UP1, we always would see consistent, decrease in KD, meaning the binding is slightly improved, although it is marginal. But this was a consistent result that we will always observe, that having RGG motif improves the binding. So with that background, and then what I told you, that RGG motif in many other protein has been found to sense or bind to the quadruplex, we thought we will probe this aspect a little bit further. So I'm showing here now the spectra of UP1 plus RGG. Again, this is very well studied for structure by a few groups in around the globe. And now I'm overlaying it on the UP1 plus RGG, the UP1 domain alone. And we can, by doing that simple maths, we can conclude that the residues in the middle are likely originating from the RGG domain. And indeed, when we make the RGG domain alone by itself and record an HSQC spectra, it overlays quite reasonably well with the those peak in UP1 plus RGG. Now, again, for this audience, I would not describe in detail, but what this suggests is that the RGG domain or RGG box in UP1 plus RGG is behaving like an intrinsically disordered domain, which is again not a surprise because that is how it is predicted to be. Now, we made an attempt to assign this intrinsically disordered domain. We could get some partial assignment, and now, as I mentioned, there are some fantastic paper coming from Tanya Mittag group where they have actually assigned the complete LCD domain. Hopefully, we will be able to use that, get some insight from that work. But this is where we were in our work. So once we had the HSQC spectra of the RGG, isolated RGG box, we added the single-stranded DNA to it. And to our surprise, again, we did not find any chemical shift perturbation. Now, we would actually expect that there will be some binding, but we did not see any perturbation. Same was true when we added the single-stranded RNA of different sequence and length. We did not see any significant chemical shift perturbation. Now, after that, we added the quadruplex form of DNA and RNA, and I'm showing here now this TEL22 sequence, which is a well-studied telomere DNA sequence which forms quadruplex. And we start seeing nice chemical shift perturbation. In fact, we fitted it to a KD of about 350 macromolar using these NMR chemical shifts perturbations. Now, same is for the tera-RNA quadruplex. We, of course, as I mentioned, we confirmed that they are indeed forming quadruplexes that using, the regular CD and NMR spectroscopy characterization. Here again, here also we saw nice chemical shift perturbations when we added the quadruplex form of the RNA. and which also we could show using ITC method. And by both the method, we showed that the binding is about anywhere from 9 to 11 micromolar. So one thing that we want to bring out that indeed the binding with the RNA seems to be better. Of course, our KD value also suggests that, and also we see better chemical sheath perturbation in case of RNA quadruplex than in case of DNA quadruplex. Then again, as I mentioned, we can form quadruplexes of different topology using different sequence. For example, this TEL6 sequence forms the quadruplex of parallel topology without any loop in its structure. This dimeric TEL12 sequence forms quadruplex with the 2 loop in its structure. And again, here again, what we showed is that it does not, the RGG box did not show any binding to the TEL6, which is devoid of loops, but it showed a nice chemical sheath perturbation when we added TEL12 quadruplex, which has 2 loops in its structure. Now, from this result, we conclude that within the quadruplex, the binding seems to be more for the loop region, not so much to the quartet part of the quadruplex. So again, same was for the RNA. In case of RNA quadruplexes, for the TERA6 sequence, we did see some minor chemical sheath perturbation, but again, we see much robust chemical sheath perturbation when we have the quadruplex with the loop in its topology. All right. So as I mentioned that the RGG box are often found adjacent to the other folded domain, and same is true for this protein. So the UP1 is known to bind to the quadruplex and ultimately destabilize it. So we wanted to see whether RGG box influences that. So we carefully followed, as done previously, the unfolding of the quadruplex by the UP1 or UP1 in the presence of RGG motif. And if we quantitate this, we found that having RGG motif indeed makes the UP1 domain unfold the quadruplex better. Same conclusion we drew from following the immunoproton spectra of the quadruplex TEL22 sequence. And again, we also use the FRET base experiment by using the the acceptor and donor fluorophore, and we showed again that having RGG box makes the UP1 unfold quadruplex better. So again, we were at the time of publishing this study, we were asked whether what happens if you mutate these arginine. So that also we arginine from the RGG box or RGG motif, RGG sequence. That is what we did, and indeed we found that UP1 plus RGG unfolds quadruplex is much better than UP1. And as we mutate these arginine to alanine, we indeed see this trend of them becoming like UP1 in terms of folding the unfolding quadruplexes. So now I'm basically at the end of my slide. I would conclude that what we have shown so far is that the RGG box of HNRNPA1 indeed seems to have a selectivity for the quadruplex form of the DNA or RNA. And what we also showed and what we also proposed is that the initial binding of RGG box to the G quadruplex using the loop region, brings the UP1 domain close to the quadruplex, which then binds better and helps in this specific destabilization of these quadruplexes. So so basically this is where we are on this project. And as I mentioned in the very beginning, what we are interested in now is understanding how this quadruplex recognition or binding by the RGG box is influenced by the arginine methylation, which is a type of post-translational modification. So that is where we are currently, and we want to know basically how arginine methylation modulates these interactions. So with that, I will conclude. I think I'm also on time. So I would like to acknowledge few people here, especially my graduate student Meenakshi Ghosh, who have now graduated and gone for a better position, and current student Niranjan Parul and Deepankar, who are now will take this work forward. I of course would like to thank the facilities, especially NMR facilities at our MBU department, as well as the NMR Research Center in ISC. Also, we use quite a bit of ITC in our work, and again, this is in our own department, and also we use it the NCBS facility for this. And the funding is from the different grants from the Government of India and our institute IISc. And thanks for your attention.
Okay, thank you, Mahavir. You have finished well in time. I think there are a couple of questions already in the chat box.
Okay.
Let me try to read out for you.
Sure.
First talk, I think there was Jeet had a question. I'm not able to see it here.
Uh-huh.
Can I read it? Or...
Yeah, you read it, Jeet. Can you say? I'm not seeing it here. Jeet, you can read it out.
Yeah, I'll ask.
Sure,
nice talk, Mahavir.
Thank you.
Just a general question about ITC data fitting. Do you float the stoichiometry, or do you fix it to a predetermined number from some alternate
No,
data?
no. For all our ITC, we keep it floating because, as you know, I mean, in the paper we discussed this. Knowing the correct stoichiometry, is it becomes very interesting and important often.
Right.
And that you can, if you fix it, of course, if you know that what stoichiometry you expect, you may want to fit it, but otherwise we keep it floating.
Okay.
Of course, that depends on also if your concentrations are measured correctly. So
Right.
if you know that if you know that our concentrations are measured correctly, and if we get a stoichiometry, which we believe, it can also give nice insight into the binding,
Yeah.
the interactions.
In principle, N and delta H values are fitted separately, so it should be able to independently give both the values correctly. So I just had a question out of curiosity, because
Yes.
you did not mention the stoichiometry values there, so I thought.
Correct. Yeah. In the slide, maybe it's not there. Now we have all published this, but the stoichiometry, we in our fitting we kept it floating.
Okay. Thanks.
Yeah.
Okay, there is another question from Satyamurthy. He says, nice talk and work. What is the loop topology of TEL22?
Okay. Yeah. Thanks, Satyamurthy. Maybe I should talk to you. I mean, I'm really. I mean, this was. It's not. I'm not well versed with the quadruplex. I know it's a. You can form quadruplexes of different structure and topology with the loop difference and the parallel anti-parallel nature, more so for DNA quadruplexes. What we use basically are the set sequences, the very well studied sequences. Okay, so I'm not recollecting what type of topology they will have, but what I do believe though, because we are finding that RGG box, particularly this RGG box, seems like it is very specific for the loop in this structure. The topology of the loops will be, of course, is very important. But yeah, I don't recall. I can't comment with confidence what kind of topology these sequences have.
Okay, there is another question.
I will look into, we can discuss also this. Yeah.
Another question by Nitin Kacharia. He says, nice talk. RGG bind to all the conformation adapted by it moved somewhere. Okay. RGB motif is positively charged, I think. So have you also tried RNA titration with the different salt concentrations?
No, it is true. So this is the most striking result, right? I mean, RGG of course is charged, positively charged, and we are adding single-stranded RNA and DNA, and we did not see chemical sheet perturbation. While we saw nice perturbation when we added the quadruplex. The salt, we for our work, they were at that point of time we could make many combinations, and we restricted because we wanted to use a salt concentration in which these sequences are known to form quadruplexes, right? So typically people use 100 millimolar NaCl or KCl. Here I may have shown data for only one salt, but we had at least for the DNA part, we repeated our interaction both in the salt as well as, I mean, both in the sodium chloride as well as in potassium chloride. But we basically use 100 millimolar NaCl or KCl in our study so far. So we have not explored other salt. Yes.
So Dr. Grace has one question and possibly one suggestion. Her question is, does the RGG bind to all the conformations adapted by G quadruplex? And she also has a suggestion, use HNCA NNH for assigning LCD domain. So
Correct.
that is the suggestion.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, yeah, I mean, yeah, we should assign this, and we'll use all the methods now. And as I mentioned, now there is a assignment published for the entire LCD domain. So we will take help from them in our future work. The other question was, what was the first question? Sorry.
Does the RGG bind to all the conformations adapted by
Yes.
G quadruplex?
So yes, this is again very debatable and very interesting topic. In our work, we limited ourselves to the quadruplexes formed by the telomere DNA and the tera-RNA. Okay, so we wanted to restrict it to that. So we don't know whether this RGG motif can bind to other quadruplexes, formed by other sequences. But there are reports of RGG motif in other proteins. And of course, and also there is a report that it binds to the single-strand RNA in some other RGG sequences. So overall, basically, this is just an emerging area right now. What we believe is that, and other people also put forth this idea, that the RGG repeat, R and arginine and glycine residues are common in all the RGG repeats. So what will determine whether a particular RGG box or will bind to a quadruplex or not, or different type of quadruplex, will be basically likely be the intervening residues. Okay. In fact, there are reports where people have shown that if you have a tyrosine residues, you have the increased specificity for the RNA quadruplexes. Versus if you have the phenylalanine residues there, the specificity changes for the DNA quadruplexes. So, all these are sort of open question, and we are getting answered one by one, I hope.
Okay, we can take one last question. It is by Ranabir. He says, it's a great talk. How does the full-length protein bind to RNA quadruplex? Does the RRM bind RNA and RGG bind the loop?
So, the RGG, I mean, we have shown this, that RGG, the UP1 domain, the folded domain also binds to the quadruplex. But, we have to do that carefully because, after some incubation time, it also unfolds it just by binding and unfolding it. And the simple way to explain is that the binding of UP1 for the DNA quadruplex, single strand DNA is higher than for the quadruplex. So, indeed, it binds to the quadruplex. We could not, unfortunately, follow it through NMR because whenever we titrated UP1 domain with the quadruplex, we see likely this interaction in intermediate exchange, and we see basically, severe, deterioration, or rather, the HSQC spectra, we see that the spectra get worse, right, because of the intermediate exchange likely. So we could not follow it, but definitely it binds to the quadruplex. But the RGG having with the UP1 makes it basically specific, and then it helps in the unfolding of the quadruplex.
Okay, for the sake of time now, I think we cannot take any more questions. We will anyway. Thank you, Mahavir, for excellent presentation. Now we will move on to the next talk. Thank you, Mahavir.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Yeah.
So, Surjit, you are there? Okay.
Yeah. So I share my screen.
No, wait. Oh, you can start sharing your screen, please.
Okay.
Okay. So let me introduce Professor Surjit Bhattacharya. So Professor Surjit Bhattacharya is currently in the School of Biological Sciences since 2005 at NTU. He received his bachelor degree in agriculture sciences from India, master in biotechnology from India, and PhD degrees from the Indian Institute of Science, Bangalore, respectively. Before joining NTU, SBS, Professor Bhattacharya was staff scientist at the National Research Council of Canada, Montreal. His research interests include structural biology using NMR spectroscopy and drug design. So with this, let me invite Professor Sujit. Sujit, you have 30 minutes for you, and please
Thank you
leave a couple of
for
minutes
the
at the end for
introduction.
discussion.
Okay, thank you. I would like to thank the organizer to invite me for this seminar series. And Atreya is definitely greatly missed, and it is unbelievable. So I'm going to talk about something which actually rooted the origin of this project in IISc Bangalore, Molecular Biophysics Unit. So I'll be talking today de novo design heme binding beta sheet proteins. So we really don't work too much on designing proteins. Our major emphasis on working on antimicrobial peptides and integrins. But recently we started looking into it using some graduate students. So basically what we try to do in de novo protein design, we mimic nature, right? So let's say we have a few different folds for helical for naturally occurring water-soluble proteins. Like they could be all helical or could be mixed helical or beta sheet, or possibly could be all beta barrels, like everything is beta sheet. So we try to understand the folding process of the proteins by de novo designing. So this is one thing. Another thing is that if we can introduce functionality in the design proteins, so we can have new proteins of new functions. So there are two groups of protein, water soluble and the membrane proteins. The membrane proteins fold are basically, you have standing helices, which passes the membranes, or you have the beta barrel, which are the transmembrane. So only the two types of folds. So when you look into the designing proteins and earlier stages, we really wanted to design those secondary structure in protein. So if we dissect the 3D structure of protein, we find two different structural elements. One is helical structure and one is a beta strand. So the helical structure is more attractive because of designing feasibility of designing, because we need all short range hydrogen bond to design helices. On the other hand, designing beta strand or beta sheet is a bit complicated because you need an additional beta strand to come and fold on the top of it. So either parallel or anti-parallels. So the helical design was much more went forward, lagging the design of beta sheet. And the case is still valid in today's age of computational protein design. So the computational protein design, which have been using Rosetta and the other program, made a lot of advances in understanding how a sequence can fold into three-dimensional structure. So like they use amino acid sequence, which are compatible to the target structure. So not really creation of proteins. So we know that how the sequence can fold. So it's a reverse folding problem. So you have a starting structure and you use a computer program and you find out sequence that can fold. And that's quite successful in designing many different types of proteins. And mainly you will see that the proteins are all basically helical or helical and beta strand together. And very recently, the work was done to find in computational protein design, the design of beta barrel, which is not really been a lot of advancement. So this is the only protein, a barrel protein designed by the group in University of Washington, 110 amino acid proteins, which binds to a fluorescent molecule. So introducing functionality even is much more complicated rather than doing the design for the structure. So when someone design a functional proteins, what people are looking into, take a well-folded protein and mutate or optimize the binding site and create a new binding. So you are using a starting structure and then rationally mutate those amino acids and create a new structure. Or use a directed evolution like cytochrome C, And Francis Arnold got Nobel Prize for evolution of new functions and practically the function evolution of the new function rather than any kind of structure. Okay, so when we try to develop proteins with the functions, so that's the people use so-called minimalist approach because we cannot really create de novo proteins with larger structure like nature did and with a function in it. Like you cannot really create a myoglobin-like structure binds a heme or hemoglobin-like structure. So the initial studies were all done, or still we are working, people are doing on coil scaffolds. It's a very simple motif, like we have two helices wrap around each other, and the D position of the helix contain a hydrophobic amino acid leucine. So basically, there are very strong interactions between the helices, and that gather a lot of interest in designing proteins, functional proteins using the coil. And Degrado and Dutton's group, they extensively work on this. So they use designed coil, and then that can bind heme. Either they can bind two heme or one heme. And the design was quite successful in making proteins water soluble and recently also in the transmembrane. However, one of the limitation of this coil is a lack of structural characterization. We really don't know the folding of those coil, which is designed, and what is the structure when it binds to heme. So as you can see here in the NMR spectrum of one of this representative coil, in the absence of heme, and this is the HSQC, as you can see, all these peaks are jumbled up in the center. So probably it kind of a molten globule kind of state or not really folded. So when we add the heme, there was some changes, but still it does not show a really great folded protein in complex with heme. However, most of the studies uses circular dichroisms to show that the helical structure. Okay, so now given the fact that we are not really able to go for good structural studies with the helical bundles, although it's been used more frequently. So can you ask this question, can alternative fold be tested as a minimalist approach for designing proteins? So 4-helix bundles have been all the topology used so far because it's also extensively used for heme, chlorophyll, and many other derivatives. The reason is that it's significantly, it's easy to design because the coil fold is very straightforward. And then the regular nature and simple parameterization can include computational design of the coil. So before going to the beta sheet, we actually I want to share a little bit of our design of helical protein which binds to heme in the membrane. And this is a non-coil proteins. Now what we did here, we actually use an antimicrobial peptides which binds to, so mainly the antimicrobial peptide binds to membrane at the surface topology as shown in this cartoon. And this particular peptide bind to micelles, and not as a monomeric helix, but as a tetramer or dimer. So we thought of changing rationally the amino acid sequence in the middle of this, this sequence of VK22 peptide, make it more hydrophobic and allow the peptide to interact in the membrane. So what we did, we introduced some of the motifs like GGX, which is very well-known motif, which allowed the helices, the transmembrane helices to come closer and pack. We also introduced some of this allocoil motif. And so rationally, we keep changing the sequence, and NMR studies were done in each of these individual to see, are we really switching the surface topology to transmembrane topology? So finally, when we arrived the final sequence where we have the sequence which contain the helical allocoil motif and the GXS motif, along with we change this tyrosine, which the helices are interface of this helix to histidine to bind to heme. So we call this as a het probe. So this is a non-coil kind of design, and in the membrane. So we did NMR structure. We express this protein in bacterial cell, do the isotope labeling, and we find that this protein, in the absence of heme, are very well folded into an antiparallel dimeric structure. And as you can see here, this is a hydrogen deuterium exchange in the lipid detergent micelles, and many of those are actually protected. So meaning that the orientation of this apoprotein at least in the transmembrane or is the perpendicular orientation with the micelles. And we tested with created the hollow proteins, but we are unable to make a very high tight complex because of probably presence of the micelles. But you can see very nice shift when we titrated with cobalt porphyrin, which is does not have a paramagnetic center. And you can see that there are many shifted. Many of the resonances are shifted in a well-folded spectrum. So our non-coil design is kind of better than the coil. At least you can see very well folded structure and their interactions. Okay, having said that, okay, so this is the summary of the study. So you have a het pro. We call this het pro. It's a dimer in the absence of heme. When we add heme, it binds to two heme molecule at the interface of the membrane, and then it's form a tetramer. So this is this protein also shows some kind of catalase activity or hydrogen peroxidase activity in the presence of a substrate. Okay, so naturally occurring heme binding proteins are like, they're mainly helical, but there are also fewer examples where heme can be found in a beta sheet topology, like nitrophorins is a structure where the heme is found to be coordinated with the two histidines. So there are fewer examples of somehow nature actually chosen helical structure to be more favored for binding to heme. And there are also fewer structure like water-soluble chlorophyll proteins, which are also beta sheet, binds to chlorophyll, which is also a similar structure of heme. Now, so when you think of designing beta hairpin, the beta sheet, which you have been doing for binding to the heme, I need to give a little bit of introduction or a bit of history. So the beta hairpin and beta sheet structure design started much later than the helical structure, designing helical structure. So there are a group which involved in designing beta hairpin in the late 90s and early 20s. Luis Serrano designed a triple standard beta hairpin, which is water soluble. And this is the famous trip-zip beta hairpin, which you have a tryptophan zipper. So all the tryptophan actually in the one face of the hairpin and they stack to each other. So the Serrano's group and the strip-zip hairpins, they use just naturally occurring amino acids to design those structure. On the other hand, Sam Gelman groups in Wisconsin, Madison, and Balaram's group in MBU, they were designing beta hairpin and the beta strand using deproline gly as the corner amino acids to form a nice turn. And so the strand of the beta sheet can pack with each other. And Balaram's group was extremely successful in designing the structural fold of this 4-stranded, 3-stranded, 4-stranded, even 8-stranded beta sheet. Okay, but they are all extended sheet and without any kind of biological functions in it. But typically, the work is very important in the further progress. So I was actually involved in determining some of the structure of when I was a graduate student in Balaram's lab. I look into NMR studies of some of these peptides. And I think Raghuttama did a lot of work on this, and I guess he's in the audience today. So it was very exciting to see the first crystal of Balaram's peptide in the Balaram's hairpin in crystals. And Balaram's collaborator, Isabella Carl, solved the structure, and this was reported in PNAS. And this structure so nice hairpin formed in crystal, and it conclusively proved that the diprogly at the center of this octapeptide form a type 2' beta turn. So having said that, now I move on to my own work. So when I started my lab in NTU, we really did not work on this kind of problem until very recently. So a PhD student joined my lab, and I was thinking about a problem to give it to him because he came as a surprise from some other lab. So I thought of, okay, so he can try doing some new work. So why designing beta hairpin? And then, so basically the beta sheet, as I told you before, is not been explored like the helical structure has been explored. So this is one of the important impetus, like we should design more of those, try to design helical beta sheet structure. So we design a very short peptide to start with and let it fold into hairpin. using a deep proline gly as a beta turn. So we thought of making this peptide to go into the membrane, so making it is a little bit more attractive because there is no such hairpin structure available in presence of membrane, or at least in the detergent micelles. So we also put an histidine amino acid here that can coordinate heme, and a couple of hydrophobic amino acids and aromatic amino acids that could stabilize the helix. And in the first design, we attached a myristoylation group in the N-terminus, making the peptide more hydrophobic, so you can go into the micelle or the membranes. So one has to be really a bit of lucky that the first design sequence worked so beautiful. And we see this peptide is able to bind heme. So this is the optical spectrum of heme in the absence of peptide, in the presence of peptide. You can see the peak been sharpening up in the presence of the design peptide we call IV8. And these are all the studies actually shows that the peptide is able to bind heme in a stoichiometry of 2:1. So meaning that you need two peptides to bind one heme, and that is really you have one histidine. So one histidine can coordinate with the iron of the heme along with another peptide. So basically the peptide is dimerizing in the micelles. The binding affinity of this peptide to the heme was very modest, like only 5 micromolar. It's not that a impressively high affinity because probably the peptide needs to dimerize along with the heme. The NMR spectrum was beautiful. We are very happy to see that we are able to identify each of the cross peaks coming for this hairpin. It's making the hairpin extremely stable. So you can see even the alpha-alpha cross peaks, which are really want to see when the hairpin really falls into nice structure. And then we saw all the NOE connectivities from the site or from the lipid micelles with the peptide. So we kind of arrive into the model that the many of these residues of the peptide are deeply inserted towards the micelle center, and this is the structure of the small peptide in the micelle. So it's basically it's not a parallel orientation. So the peptide is actually inserting into the micelles. So this is the first example of this kind of study, and we were able to publish in Non-Governmental Chemistry. So now we got more interested to getting few things ahead. So we wanted to know if we can design hairpin like getting the heme and not in a dimeric form of the two peptide, but within one peptide. So the way one can do, design a hairpin and probably have to coordinating histidine across the two strand. And I thought that may not be a very good idea because it may not be, we built a model and we find that the interactions is not really that favorable to bind to heme. So only way to make it a 4-stranded beta sheet. And the 4-stranded beta sheet, I can put a heme between these two antiparallel beta strand 2 and strand 3. So with this mind, this sequence was designed. So we have an N-terminal acetylated peptide and O-methylated. So basically this is a hydrophobic peptide. It should go into the membrane, and we have 2 deep proline, actually 3. So this is a deep proline glide, this is deep proline glide, this is deep proline glide. So we have 3 of those. So it's a complex fold. Let's see, does it fold? And so this peptide also folded very nicely, the design sequence. You can see a lot of NOE confirming the cross strand NOE between the beta strand. And the peptide did not bind with the kind of stoichiometry you want. So as you can see, we want one heme. We want only one heme to bind to the one peptide. But in this design, when you have 3 deep proline gly sequence, the peptide is very well folded. We have 4 standard beta sheet, as you saw here in the structure, but it seems to be binding with an altered stoichiometry, the 2:1. So basically, again, the peptide is dimerizing along with a single molecule heme, and the binding affinity is not that great. So we need to do something else. So we thought that this interface where the 2 histidines are facing each other, the heme is not able to interact because there are many amino acids that in the pocket. So that does not allow the heme to be inserted into this pocket. So we thought that making this 2-strand not so interactive. So what we did, we just simply removed this deep proline and put a glycine. So the interaction between the 2 strands has removed, the NMR structure shows, But again, the binding affinity was quite lousy, 8.9 micromolar, and the peptide to heme stoichiometry, as we determined, 2:1. So we are not reaching the target what we want to do. Now, long time ago, as a graduate student, again in Bologna's lab, I worked on a peptide which contain omega amino acids. Okay, so these are the design peptide with omega amino acids that form helical structure. Now, I thought about using these amino acids as a linker rather than putting anything else. The idea of putting this amino acid as a linker comes from the fact that this hydrophobic amino acid may be going inside the membrane well because they're all hydrophobic and may allow the heme to bind better in a desired stoichiometry you want. So they're all the omega amino acids. They're all they're non-coded amino acids. So you have alpha, beta, and then gamma. So there are repertoire of those amino acids. So now the first peptide we designed in this just contain beta-ala, and you can see we're on the right track. So when we use the beta-alanine as replacing the deep glide between the strand 2 and strand 3, the stoichiometry change. We get 1:1 peptide to heme that we wanted to see. And the binding affinity also significantly improved, 2.7 micromolar. So this is all done in a low concentration of detergent micelles, like as a membrane mimic. Now, since we are on, then we change those amino acids to beta, to gamma, to delta, and making more space for him to bind between these two histidines. So as you can see here, as you increase the length of the carbon chain of these amino acids, the binding affinity significantly improved. So we started with like 0.4 micromolar, like the nanomolar affinity. And peptide to heme stoichiometry remains all the time at 1:1. So this is the structure of one of those. We see that two hairpin basically forming, and then this is the linker amino acids. There are no interaction between strand 2 and strand 3. So basically this is a binding pocket where heme can come in and can coordinate with the two histidine between these two strands. So this is a model because we are unable to determine this whole structure because the heme, when we add heme into the solution, the NMR spectrum become broad. So we still need to standardize the getting the structure of this intercomplex. Okay, so this design peptide shows activity in not very strong, but some kind of weaker activity when we test in the peroxidase. So we add in substrate called ABTS and then allow the substrate to be reduced in the presence of heme. So it shows some kind of activity, but again, it's not that strong because both the histidine are involved in binding to heme. So you also get interested that, so this peptide binds to one heme. Can we design peptide more with longer hairpin or longer extended strand binds to two heme? So with that aim, we design a 6-stranded peptide, 1, 2, 3, 4, that will engulf 2 molecules of heme. And we also made some mutations here, like changing the histidines to alanine, and then see what is the repartition or what is the effect of changing those histidine into the heme binding. So this peptide, which binds to 2 molecules of heme, we can got the right kind of stoichiometry, as you see here from those titration studies. And it's bind heme quite tightly, 0.5 micromolar. But if we change one of those histidine to alanine, then the binding affinity is significantly reduced. So it's meaning that the heme binding in this particular 6-stranded beta sheet is kind of cooperative. So if you lose binding of one heme, the other heme does not bind that well. So here is the kind of, again, the model. So this is 6-stranded beta sheet, and that can bind to heme from the histidine coming from the different strands. So this is a summary of this work, and we see that this particular design was also showed some kind of electron transfer with cytochrome C, which the data I have not shown here, and also we can see some kind of peroxidase activity. So now those peptides which were designed to work and fold in the membrane. So getting peptide folded in membrane itself is very challenging. So we thought, okay, so can we convert this sequence and make it water soluble? So if we make it water soluble, then we can actually look into broad range of activity, because when you use the micelles or the detergents, the many activity cannot be tested because the detergent is not that good condition for checking activity. And the problem would be the structure of this kind of small peptide, they're unstable in water because the hydrogen bond strength is quite low, because water is not that great solvent for stabilizing the structure of peptides, small peptides. And also there is a problem of aggregation of peptides. But even then we tested a new design. So these are all the sequences we tested for the water soluble variant, which could bind to one molecule of heme at the beginning. So we put a lysine amino acid at the front, at the N terminus, and the C terminus to make it more soluble. As we straight away went for introducing those delta amino valeric acid or eta amino octanoic acid as a linker. And you can change many of the histidines to serine as a control and to see what happens to the heme binding. And we note that I also made a peptide where this eta amino octanoic acid have been replaced by 3 glycines. So basically, if we put a glycine as a linker, can it have the similar binding affinity to the heme compared to when you have a linker of these beta omega amino acids? So the peptides are being tested for its aggregations in water by pulse field diffusion experiment, and you can see the peptide all are monomer, and there is no self-association of the peptides. And this is the 3-D-proline. We wanted to see if the 4th standard beta sheet with 3-D-proline can be folded into aqueous solutions. And so we can see that the structure was kind of well folded, and the heme was able to bind at 0.8 micromolar affinity with 1:1 stoichiometry. Well, so when we change the D-proline in the center, make it into a omega amino acid like delta amino valeric acid or eta amino octanoic acid, we are very surprised to see an extremely high affinity heme binding. The student who was doing the experiment, she tested at least 10 times because she thought that she made some disaster in the experiment. So because it's unable to fit the data into such a high affinity binding. So these numbers are actually not a real number. Right? You can put an upper limit when you are reaching a threshold like a so high affinity. These numbers are really not that reliable. So you can see that is a high affinity interactions. So basically you can titrate with the heme, and you can see there's a breakpoint coming up here. So this peptide 2 can bind to 2 molecular heme. So it's a 1:1 stoichiometry. So we solve the structure of this peptide. You can see the heme can be actually modeled again between the 2 strands. And okay, so yeah, so if we actually use the glycine linker, we would make a great mistake. Now, if we change this eta amino octanoic acid to a triple glycine, which is kind of a homomorphous replacement, as Balaram said. So when studying these peptides, we used to comment on this. So eta amino octanoic acid, we have this number of amino acids here, number of atoms in this, and number of glycines are the same number of atoms. So it's a homomorphous replacement. So if you have these triple glycines, and it's astonishing, it's very surprising to see that we have very weak heme binding. And the reason for that, we solve the structure of this peptide, and you have 3 glycines here, and then there is interaction between the strand. So the 2 strand, the heme binding pocket is kind of occluded. So there are side chains coming and blocking the heme entry. So basically, that does not really bind to heme very well. So since we have designed peptide in water, it's better to look into the folding process of those peptides. So the peptide 1, which we have 3-D-proline, did not show a very nice transitions as we melt the temperature, but it saw a very nice transition in complex with heme. The peptide 3 is slightly better. The temperature melting with the heme was not that good. So basically, probably there will be multi-step transitions happening when you unfold the peptides. But if you look at the hollow proteins, they're extremely stable. The heme was able to interact with the peptide even at a 6 molar concentration of urea. So the heme really is very strongly interacted with the peptide. And you look into the kinetics for the heme binding in the stop flow measurement. So you can see the peptide 2 and 3, which contain this delta omega, delta amino valeric acid or eta amino octanoic acid. They have a very nice pocket. So the heme can easily go in, very fast kinetics, and you can see the OD is pretty high. So meaning that the heme is able to accommodate into the binding pocket very nicely compared to peptide 1 and 5, which contain either triple glycines or you have another deproline gly in the sequence. So these peptides have the binding pocket, which is occluded by interaction of side chain between the two adjacent beta strand. So this is our first peptide, which water soluble. We call this a heme cage. So the binding pocket we design, we call this a heme cage because heme is nicely sitting here with a very tight affinity, very comparable to the naturally occurring proteins, helical proteins which binds to heme. So now we get more excited that can we increase our number of heme binding to the water soluble? Yeah.
You have another 3 minutes.
3 minutes. Okay, I'm done almost. So okay, can we expand our design to bind to multiple hemes? So basically, in the nature, we can have a stacking interactions in the heme or sideways interaction with the heme. So this is a multi-heme conduit protein, which contains many hemes. And one of the limitation of the helical structure is that, which is coil-coil, can only bind to heme. So we again. This is again a panel of peptide has been designed to accommodate more number of hemes. Either now we have a heme cage protein, so that can have a stacking interactions for let's say we have the miniprotein 3, which was designed to have 2 heme stacked, or miniprotein 2, we can have 2 heme sidewise. So there are a number of peptides have been designed. I cannot go through everything tonight. So this is one of the structure of the 6 standard beta sheet, which is in the water. And then it's nicely well folded. We have evidence of interaction between the strand. And this peptide binds to desired stoichiometries. And also miniprotein 2 and 4, they can bind to heme at a stacking orientation. So basically in this peptide, the binding pocket is more deeper. So it can bind one heme here and another heme down here. So the design, the heme binds according to the design, and we have all the structures of these peptides. And this shows heme binding affinities are quite strong, but in compromise with this peroxidase activity. So when heme binds to peptide or any protein with a very high affinity, the peroxidase, which is another activity of this heme containing enzyme, is appeared to be low because we are now engaging the heme to interact with the peptide. So this is a summary slide where we have so far achieved that we can actually make very small peptides called mini proteins that can bind to multiple hemes in many different orientations. Like you can have a stack orientations or you can have a sideways orientations. So I guess I just conclude here that it's our work opens up a new area of designing beta sheet small proteins that can bind to heme, and possibly we can actually explore other binding of many with many other cofactor, like could be metal ions or many other things in the near future. So I just acknowledge the students who did the remarkable work. Mukesh Mahajan, currently at the Harvard Medical School. He started this HETPRO and IV8 peptide work, followed by Adita D'Souza. She extensively worked on the other peptides in the membrane, and then also in the water-soluble variants. And my colleague, Jometras, he helped us to do some IR studies for some of the peptides. Sarita is currently doing postdoc at Syracuse. And I acknowledge Ministry of Education for the funding. So that's all. And he'll be happy to take any questions.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Sujit. Now, talk is open for discussion. I don't see any questions in the chat box, but we can still keep it open. If there are any questions, please Now, of course, since the talk is open, you can enter in the chat box or we can unmute you selectively. Any questions, please? For talk is open for discussion.
I think the talk is crystal clear.
Correct. Oh, okay. There is a question from Dr. Grace.
Mhm.
She says, nice talk. Have you increased the number of glycine and see the binding?
Number of?
Glycine,
Oh,
GLY, glycine.
hi there. So no, I did not. So we limited to 3 because we wanted to compare with delta aminovaleric acid as a homomorphic replacement. So no, we did not increase it more.
I think there are no other talks. No other questions. We'll thank Sujit for excellent talk.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Sujit, and I'll thank both the speakers of the day. And I'll show the slide of the next week's speakers. With that, we can end today's Zoominar. Okay. We have next week 2 upcoming talks, one from Neil and other from Lara Kastner from Manchester. Same time, again at 7:30 next Tuesday. See you all again. Thank you very much for joining.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye. Good night, everyone.
Hello?
Yeah, thank you, sir. Yeah.
Thank
Thank
you,
you.
Suri. Good night.
Thank you. Bye.